Welcome to the Didi and Lital Show. Advice, thoughts, and stories from a married couple on cybersecurity, technology, and life in general. Now here are your hosts, Didi and Lital.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Didi and Lital Show. It's another week, and we're after the Super Bowl. Hi, Didi. How's it going?
Well, the NFL found new ways to suck, as usual. The NFL finds really creative ways of taking the best product in sports and making it suck a little bit more.
Okay, why?
So, if you have not seen the Super Bowl and you live under a rock, it's not your fault. This was a very, very, very good game. Mahomes.
It was a good game.
It was a very good game. Mahomes is showing why Mahomes is amazing. And even in this game, he wasn't the best player. I think Jalen Hurts was the much better quarterback. And the game ended on what I like to call a wet fart ending, because it ended on a hold, which was a very, very ticky-tacky hold. There were a million of these happening all through the game. There were not a lot of flags thrown, which made the message of let them play, let them play. And the Eagles guy got called right in the last 2 minutes for a hold. And Kansas City ran the clock and was able to kick. And that's how they won. And as a New Englander, I can't complain. The refs gave Tom Brady at least one Super Bowl. I know everybody that is not from New England will say that. We were saved by a couple of ref calls, but still, I think this moment, this end, I think the only one that was just as bad was the Rams versus Saints one. That was just horrible non-call. So this call and that non-call basically are the worst thing to end a playoff or Super Bowl game.
I'll comment about what I, enjoy, which is the halftime show.
Yeah.
Which, let's start. I love Rihanna. I think it was a great show. A lot of people complained that it was just a good enough show. She didn't change clothing. She didn't collaborate with somebody, which is typically what makes it elevated. Like the dancing wasn't that. She announced her pregnancy while being in the Super Bowl halftime. That's amazing. And people say, it's part of the trend of just good enough. There is a new kind of term, relatively new term of good enough parenting. Like you don't need to be always spot on, the best parent. You don't, in life in general, just be good enough. So she was good enough. It was awesome.
You're saying that you, the person of good enough?
I'm not a person of good enough. If any of us is a person of good enough, it's you.
Of course.
I hate good enough. Like good enough is not good enough for me.
I invented good enough. Good enough is an art. So, two very interesting anecdotes about me and good enough.
Yeah.
Anecdote number one of good enough was when I was taking my final test in medical school. I needed to score like a 67 to get my 9.1
GPA
for my summa cum laude. And all I did was, it's medical school. It's 600 questions of, answer something. It's like a day and a half of questions. As soon as I knew that I scored 70, I gave the test away and said, goodbye. It's summer. It's Tel Aviv. I'm on the beach. Thank you very much. I'm done.
How did you know that you had 70, though?
I'm a genius. I'm a modest.
He is a good enough genius.
No,
Producer Dave, you told us an awesome good enough story. I wanted to tell the audience because they probably went born and when the story was relevant.
It was a combination of good enough and a few more things.
Right. So it has to do with Mike Dukakis, who, for those that don't know, longtime governor of Massachusetts, who ran a tragically flawed campaign and got slaughtered by, that was George W. Bush, I believe. Yes. And so a couple of years later, I was at a charity breakfast, and comedian Al Franken was there, and he has this character, the the motivational speaker guy, Stuart Smalley, and they did a little bit on stage, and he called him up. He says, Mike Dukakis, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and people really like you. And he said, thank you, Stuart. And he said, now I want you to repeat after me. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough. He repeats that. He says, I want you to repeat after me. I only got 46% of the vote in the election. And Mike Dukakis instead says, I got 46 million people to vote for me, or whatever it was. That's the wrong number, but I got millions and millions of people to vote for me. And so people laughed, and then Al Franken says, Michael, denial is not just a river in Egypt. That's his signature line. So
Yes.
there you go. So
That's a line
not
we
quite
use
good
at
enough.
home
Exactly.
regularly.
We use that at home regularly. That denial is not just a river in Egypt.
Yeah.
So
So,
we have-
thinking that good enough is good enough in life is denial.
Good enough is an art. You need to know when to use good enough and when not to, because when you do things like compliance, you need to do good enough compliance.
But that's a problem. If you just do good enough compliance, then when actually things happen, you get fucked.
Well, here's the interesting thing. You need to understand when good enough is what matters. And I'll explain why. So there are things like the TSA, which is security theater. We, as Israelis, know that this is security theater. It will stop nothing. It will not stop a nosebleed.
Yeah, it's, something happened long time ago. Somebody, had a bomb in his shoe or like something that appeared like a bomb. And ever since, we all have this
Shoe thing.
theater of taking off shoes before flying. And like the fact that it wasn't killed
Exactly.
yet, it's insane.
And right now, all our security frameworks that exist for our compliance reasons are doing the good enough and not doing the actual solving.
Secure.
The
solving it.
secure, they're
Okay.
doing the good enough. And I'll give you an example. One of my favorite bodies, and I don't blame them, guys, please don't jump on me when this comes out. NIST. NIST is an amazing body, but it's the national, the N in the NIST is national, which means that it's sort of kind of federal, sort of kind of government, sort of kind of moves in a committee way. So slow. So by the time the committee meets and discusses and does anything, the world has moved on.
Pandemic happened. Things shifted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
it took a lot of
How often
regulators.
do they update the framework? I don't know. Maybe we can ask our audience.
It takes years. It takes years. I think the releases are bi-yearly or something along these
Okay.
lines. So
We'll check afterwards. When
promise
was
to
the
check.
latest NIST framework released?
So you have NIST that has a framework around the security compliance. You have
Right.
CIS. You have CSA cake. and
ISO.
ISO. ISO is something else.
ISO.
ISO and SOC 2 do something else.
Okay.
They have like a series of things to show that what you told us you're going to do, you actually do. It's variations of put a policy in place. It doesn't matter what the policy says. As long as you live by your policy, at least we know that what you describe to the world is what you do.
Okay.
And you need to have a certain set of policies. And as long as you report back to the policies that you do. So SOC 2 is a little bit in, a little bit out. FedRAMP is a lot more descriptive. HIPAA is a lot less descriptive. It's a lot closer to the tell us what you do and make sure that you do what you do. But you have all these frameworks. And from previous things that we've discussed, our love for SIMs, are there because of these frameworks.
Because you need to keep logs for a certain time, see that you have the data.
Exactly. But here we are undergoing our SOC 2 here at ORT. Thanks for funding us. So we are experiencing some very interesting things in the conversations with the auditor. So the auditor comes in and says, please describe where you send the logs of your firewalls. Now, it assumes that we have logs. It assumes that we have firewalls. It assumes that we have assets that we're protecting with a firewall. It assumes we have a premise.
You don't.
We don't. This was a funny thing when one of a company that we acquired at Cisco, I think in the 2016s, we came to their offices and the guy that does a lot of the stuff in the due diligence said, please show us your server room. And I was looking at him and said, huh? There's no server room. We bought a cloud company. They have no server rooms. Show us how you manage your devices. No devices. This is something that, and this was 2016. Right now, if you look at most companies that were born after 2014, the likelihood of them having a premise, a server room, any hardware gear, any
Company-owned endpoints.
company-owned endpoints, and the things along the lines of a firewall that protects a server, even in AWS. If you look at the kind of the growth and climb of EC2 instances versus container instances versus pure Lambdas, you'll see that serverless is king. And by the way, plugging in our friends in Snowflake, we don't own our database. We use Snowflake. We use Elastic as a service. We have their security controls, but
So you're saying SOC 2 just ignores this part, or it's included in some shape or form?
it's a lengthy conversation to say why we exclude certain rules in the SOC 2, because
Saying they're irrelevant to what your company does, the way it operates,
that they do not apply.
but they don't apply some other rules for the way you operate today, which is serverless, bring your own device, whatever, remote work,
Yes.
no perimeter.
So a big chunk of our compliance work is to show how we're still compliant by not following rules that do not apply to us. Can you guess what's the downside of all this conversation?
You tell me.
The downside of all that conversation and this lengthy, painful, long conversation about every one of those rules that we don't implement
Follow. Yeah.
is that they don't include the things that actually do matter. We looked at the identity part of a lot of those compliance frameworks, and they are starting to understand that you need to have a digital asset inventory.
Well, they require MFA, don't they? SOC 2 do require MFA.
So requirement of MFA is a very interesting thing. You will pass your SOC 2 if you paid money to Duo. By the way, love you, Duo. We want to continue doing business with Cisco. So if you pay money to Duo and you've done nothing with
Just
Duo,
being a customer of an MFA company,
most likely
it's enough
most
to pass?
Most likely,
Not even implemented, integrated.
if you show
Executed?
show a couple of screenshots that you have a policy in place, maybe you MFA me and you. There's no good way, no good structure to say, I'm protecting my sensitive applications with MFA, and not only an attestation that I'm using MFA, that it's actually enforced. There's no measure of this.
Okay.
Better yet, if you're an Azure company today, there's no way for you to attest this. This is why some of the auditors stay away from this, because there's no good way to attest, because you need to show that you're implementing conditional access, and there's no way to show that the rule fired. There's no way to do this. There's no tool that can collect all that information and show that Lital used this factor in a short session to access Salesforce.
Okay.
And that is discussed in touching around the topic, but not actually diving into what matters of, is MFA enforced and is MFA used? And are you alerting about MFA fatigue? No. There's no discussion of...
Well, that's already advanced concept into identity, right?
But that's not very advanced.
Relatively.
Right now, basic security... You're asked to do security training about this. So it means that it percolated into things, but there's no enforcement, there's no validation, there's no looking into, are you doing this? There's no discussion whatsoever about things that are identity specific, and understanding that right now that's the only control out there. There's no move towards automation. There's no discussion of time to remediate. Right now, most of the frameworks deal with, how do I prevent an attack from happening?
Still in a mindset that is preventable.
It is preventable.
There is a perimeter.
There's a perimeter. There's a preventable attack. There's no understanding of the time to remediate, the time to investigate.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's those areas that we know, those are the hardest parts. And like, yes. So help me think about it. If we want those things to move from being good enough to actually being helpful, being trustworthy, like knowing that a company is SOC 2 or company is following NIST is actually increasing its security and taking yourself from this level to that level. This is what we want, right? This is why we're all here.
Yep.
What should you do? Like, how can we impact the next framework of NIST, or like, how can SOC 2 evolve?
Let's start with the what does good enough help you? Because it's also an important thing. Because
Okay.
I don't want to just poo-poo.
Helps you with insurance.
It helps you
It's
with
important. It's very important, right?
It's very important.
We are putting a lock so that a house is insured, not
Exactly.
necessarily to prevent people from coming in.
Yep.
And it's important. I mean, it will pay us back if something happens.
Exactly.
So let's not forget that.
So it's important for cyber insurance. It's also important to deal with having this conversation is good enough, because it's important to understand if you're not negligent. There's a lot of times my early investors wanted me to come talk to other portfolio companies to understand why we implemented security controls in ORT from day one. As soon as we started launching our number one line of code was written, we spent a month before that to lock down, to make sure that GitHub is locked down, that AWS is locked down, that access is very limited and very, very restricted. Because,
But I think it gives you a false sense of security and
does.
give you a sense that you're not negligent while you might be negligent. Again, depends what negligent is, but
that's a good question.
I would argue that it puts a risk of people becoming negligent because, oh, we're SOC 2 compliant. Oh, it's fine. So I think it might do the opposite and encourage some behaviors that might be risky to a point of negligence.
That could be true. I think it is, because I think it is important to remember that not being negligent is not equivalent to being good. And
Again, good enough doesn't mean,
secure.
yeah.
The Didi and Lital show will return in a moment.
The Didi and Lital show is sponsored by ORT. In today's world, identities are the perimeter protecting the organization and are the most exploited vector by attackers. If your security teams are struggling to maintain control of identity management tools, ORT can help. ORT offers a centralized platform for discovering, monitoring, assessing, and remediating identity threats to your business. While most security platforms can take weeks or months to start identifying and remediating risks, with ORT, your security teams can get started in as little as 30 minutes and start securing the identity perimeter immediately. ORT will surface the most critical vulnerabilities and give your security teams the recommended action steps. Start your trial today at ORT.io. That's OORT.io. The Didi and Lital show is sponsored by Hunters. Hunters is a SaaS platform purpose-built for security operation teams, providing unlimited data ingestion and normalization at a predictable cost. Hunters helps SOC teams mitigate real threats faster and more reliably than SIM. Visit hunters.ai to learn more.
And right now, with the velocity of attacks, there's been a lot of thoughts. When we started shipping out Secure ID a million years ago, the thought was that Secure ID basically doesn't make you outrun the hacker. It makes you outrun everybody else. 32% of people use it. Let's go attack everybody else that is not. that is not that. So I don't outrun the tiger, I outrun you. And that is what a lot of these frameworks are there for. With new legislation, it will change the scenery, because what will happen is that everybody that will want to do business and sell to somebody else, especially a cloud-based service, they'll have to attest that they have all these controls in place. And because they have to attest, it means that it's having this no longer gives you the I'll outrun you versus outrun the tiger. And also the velocity of attacks, the ability to attack really, really fast, makes the good enough not good enough, to your point. But it is important, I think, in lifting and forcing people to do some basic things. It's a little bit like making Omri eat his vegetables. It's a continuous fight. It's a continuous argument, but we have to make him eat his vegetables, because otherwise he'll live an unhealthy life.
I heard yesterday in the news that, I don't remember the number, like half of the kids in the US never eat veggies or fruit.
Awesome.
Never, ever. And more than half of them consume daily of sugary drinks. That's terrible. Never mind.
It's good if it's good if you're a dentist.
Yeah,
So
if it's good if you are the manufacturer of Ozempic and all those drugs. They're talking now about using it for kids from 12 years old and all. Sorry, moving from security to other things.
Yes. But let's
state of health in this nation.
But things like a framework that forces people to make security awareness training mandatory is good. It's like
the basic.
It's the basic.
Yes.
At least it covers the basic.
It's eating the veggies at least once a day.
It's eating the veggies at least once a day.
It's not the more advanced stuff of working out.
Yes.
keeping
So my
your-
my little ask from the vendors of these frameworks is to think of what in your world is eating the veggies, and what in your world is make you finish the whole plate of broccoli, because there's a big difference between the two. If in our world, if I have to have a framework that tells me pick like 5 really, really important things that I have to do, and don't make it a burden, would be a lot more helpful. And CSA tried to do this with the Cake Light stuff, to try, here are 300 rules. If you keep, you're good. But they've not updated this to a real cloud modern solution. My thought is, if you want to move at the space and the speed of the internet, it has to be an open source project. I don't see another way. Somebody needs to embrace an open source project that says, this is security, and go with that. Google tried to do this with Beyond Corp, and a lot of what they're doing there was very, very smart. But it got lost in the shuffle with the creation of a lot of the zero trust, and never mapping it back into a standard body that says you need to have a control in place that says Lital cannot access this system.
Well, the Lital framework, and maybe we'll bring somebody that is an expert in that, is kind of this. But
they're still very bloated, and they still deal with a lot of stuff that is not related to a post-2010 born.
Yeah, there is a lot of gaps around cloud. I think a lot of companies talk about adding like cloud verticals, vectors into the Lital framework. I want to talk about, we'll see if we'll have time for 2 plugs of things that I saw on social media that I want to discuss. One thing I saw this week, somebody posted on my LinkedIn, Uber had like record results, and he was saying, it's a company that had bad reputation and had some incidents, serious security incidents. And obviously the market doesn't give a fuck about it. The company is successful, great quarter, and nobody cares about breaches. And I was thinking, you know what? It's actually a good thing. Like, it's normal. We all talk about breaches are the norm. I think that all this vendor crap about, the cost of a breach and company going through devastation because of a breach. The reality is that breaches in most cases do not take company out of business. And it's good that it's not. Like, oh my God, if all businesses that are being attacked were taken out of business, hell, like our economy would go to the trash. So let's face it first. Let's stop the fear mongering. I think it's all led by bad behavior FUD. We talked a lot about it in the industry. Breach is the end of the world. Company stock will go to the garbage. No, I think what breach causes is a ton of disruption. Your company is not functioning well for a while. Your team will need to deal with keeping your customers happy around the data safety instead of selling more and making revenue for a short while.
So let's agree to disagree. And I'll tell you what.
What do you think?
I think the Uber thing is complete BS. Why is that complete BS? Because Uber and Lyft destroyed the cab companies in the US.
Right.
There's no alternative to Uber. If I get off the airport, if I get off an airplane.
Do you want to use something else? You can still take a cab.
Awesome.
There are yellow cabs in all the airports.
Good
what are
luck.
you talking about?
When was the last time you took a yellow cab?
Last time I got to an airport. Seriously.
So last time
Sometimes it's so much faster. Now that also you need to, like in Boston, Logan, are you kidding me? If you are arriving in Terminal E, you need to go to Terminal C at the basement of it's like going up and down and up and down. No, the Uber pickup lane is like ridiculous. You go take a cab. That's it.
I took a cab twice. Once in California recently, and once when I got back home. Mm-hmm. It's a horrible experience. I had to explain to the driver how to. I don't want to talk to the driver. I want to push an address. I want to go to sleep. You don't sleep in things like that, but
in a cab. Disgusting.
I fall asleep as soon as my butt touches a seat anywhere, and I'm not engaged in the locomotion. I want to hit a button. I want to go to sleep.
That is fine, but you're claiming there is no alternative.
There's no alternative.
There is an alternative. You like the service, so you're using them. It's all good. I use them too.
I think that they're a monopoly. And that's my case, that why they are as successful as they are, because if you're a monopoly, and speaking of breaches, this is something that the government should have an impact of negligent behavior.
Okay.
And
but also not monopolies were breached and they still thrive. I mean,
most
I
companies
think
that are not monopolies had a bad time after a breach.
Everybody has bad time. That's what I'm saying. But like coming and saying, oh, companies will cease from existence. This is bullshit.
It's not cease to exist, but if you're not a monopoly, it will impact your bottom line.
I think it impacts you even if you're on monopoly. There is no way it will not impact you. It has a cost. It has the cost of an alternative thing that your people should be doing. Your Malcolm people should not be talking to the media about the breach. They should talk about great results of your business or the new product that you're releasing. Of course. And this is what we need to move and talk about. Instead of the fear mongering, that's my point. It's not about an Uber and the alternative to the business. My point is, we as an industry, specifically vendors, needs to move on and talk about, be realistic, and talk about the real risk to the business, which is you're dealing with things that you can prevent from dealing. Once in a while, it's inevitable. Companies might be on the radar and get breached, and then they need to have a good plan of how to handle it. But let's stop it's going to be the end of the world. Because it is not. We've seen 20 years of those breaches. Yeah. So that's important to
And I think
say.
It's related to the frameworks, that the frameworks make you believe that you're supposed to be stopping breaches versus time to remediate.
Yeah,
and
time, exactly. Make it as smooth, and be prepared, painless, have the IT people deal with it and not the whole org, if you can, there is a way to minimize the impact. Minimize the impact, make it smooth, make it faster, be able to see and resolve things. I think that is the important thing. Just thinking, oh, we can completely prevent it, or the other way, like it's going to be doomsday when it happens. It's not doomsday, and in the life of your business, some incidents will happen. The severity may different. We have time for our last topic.
I think we do.
So there was another thing that I read on social media. So bear with me.
I bear because I don't read social media.
Yeah, you're on LinkedIn. I saw a few posts. At least you post over there.
Like Ron, I am broadcast only. I broadcast that, but I don't listen.
There is a guy that he talks about modern human slavery and the different aspects of it, very tough topics. But actually, we all consume products that were built in questionable ways. A consumer electronics, cell phone device, most of them are involving some sort of human suffering in it. And his story was he goes once in a while and speaks in front of high schoolers, and he tells them and he shows them how terrible the conditions of the people building the iPhones, and how it is basically human slavery, and how we should care about it and stop it, because it's a device that everybody is using. And he found it interesting that he did this talk in a high school, in front of the high school. And at the end of the talk came this girl to him and told him, "Sir, I didn't have the time to bring this question, but I wanted to ask you, well, if we stop those sweatshops, wouldn't we need to pay more for our iPhones? I don't want to pay more. I don't have more money to pay. It's already expensive." And he said that he was shocked by the lack of empathy and by, a teenager bringing this indifference to what he just showed, a terrible story about human suffering, just to make the device that we own. And he was like, I thought it's a one-off. But then he kept on going through other high schools and doing the same talk. And he said there is no single time that this comes up. Somebody raises their hand, somebody comes to him and says, but hey, to keep the device cost low, how is it low? It's hundreds of dollars, if not 1,000. To keep it low, we need to keep those human sweatshops. And he said, tell me what's going on, guys. Like, is it like loss of empathy? And I have two things to say about that. And I wrote to him. The concept of being indifferent to human suffering and empathy for other people outside of your small family or your kind of like tribe is very new in history. Throughout our history, most human beings did not care and were part of making other people suffer. This is part
empathy.
of normalcy.
You know what drove empathy worldwide? Penicillin.
Yeah, because people stopped dying
People used to die
from everything,
from
right?
everything. People died all the time.
Yeah,
So
you get
people-
a scratch, it get inflamed, like you get,
So
and you die.
Penicillin, hygiene, and reduction of childbirth created
Washing hands in childbirth.
Yes.
That's another one, right?
Ignaz Semmelweis, if you want to know who made that. So the empathy is something very new, and we're also forcing it.
Because we're not that used to seeing suffering anymore or death.
Yes.
Death become relatively rare, especially of young people.
And second, this is a little bit of our ability as a society to start understanding other people. Now, is it a good thing or a bad thing? That's a very big question. If you ask all the jocks in high schools, they want to go back to being non-caring. And the second thing that, by the way, that bothers me because I lack empathy.
That's not true.
Is
You
how,
like saying it
Yes.
to look as if you're ruthless.
Is how-
Everybody sees that it's not true.
is how stupid people are, because pricing has nothing to do with COGS.
Absolutely. So that's another point.
For me, the fact that high schoolers are stupid and they don't realize that how much they're willing to pay
has
more impact than the sweatshops.
Guys, I want to say something. Yes, iPhone, every time they come up with the new iPhone, reduces the cost of previous versions. And the cost of manufacturing stays the same, which is nothing. So they could have got ridden from those bad practices of manufacturing if people would actually care about and keep the cost the same. Yes, it might have, reduced the margin a little bit, which they can live with. We cannot live. Shareholders should live with it. But yeah, probably nobody pushes them to because we don't care enough and we're not. But I just wanted to say that empathy to people that you don't actually know and they live in another country, far from your eyes, it's a very new concept and it might be going away, it might be eroding. It's something that is more based on education than on something inherent in us. I think we talked a little bit about some biblical concepts of like, are human beings
good by default or
bad by default? And
bad
that's
by default, bad by default.
Human nature, is it bad by default? So that's, I think education and us socializing and teaching our kids how to behave is what prevents us from being indifferent for suffering. So if we don't invest in it, and if our kids consume the education and are stuck on TikTok, that's the reality.
There's also another thing. Indifference is actually something that is bad also for the indifferent. This is something that has been a cycle in human existence all the time.
Yeah.
So the French Revolution came from the lady that said, let them eat cake. So, by the way, she never said let them eat cake. It's a known fallacy. But the idea is that once the majority of people live in those bad conditions, eventually they have nothing to lose. They take up guns. They kill whomever's in charge. So we should build our empathy, especially if we're rich and privileged, to stay on top. Because otherwise, eventually...
It will erode.
Eventually, when we will stop caring and stop taking care of whomever is less fortunate, eventually they'll stop caring back, and there's more of them, and they have guns. So that's something that, rather than to say, oh, we need to care because we need to care, say we need to care if we want to survive. That would be the message that I would give people.
I think about it differently. I think caring
You will not believe how fast the revolution will come, and people will be next to the wall.
But I think about it differently. I think that empathy is what actually creates the win-win, the economical thriving growth that we've experienced in 20 and 21st centuries. So only when you have this level of confidence that life is good, future will be better, food is there, you can actually go up in the Maslow hierarchy, feel that, I can build a business. I can invest in my future. That's going to be good. So empathy is part of ensuring that we have a good future. With that, I think that we'll wrap up. We touched many topics this episode. Hope you liked it. Please rate, review us, share with your friends. Thanks for Oud and Hunters for sponsoring the show. The Didi and Lital show is available wherever you get your podcast. See you soon. Thanks, Didi.
Thanks, Lital.
Have a great one.